On today's Yarn Spotlight, yarn expert Clara Parks is telling me that recycling has a much longer history than we think it does. Hi, Clara.
Hi, Uni.
So, tell me this story about recycled fibers and.
Well, recycled fibers are nothing new. You know how there's the whole green movement right now. Well, actually, we've been recycling fibers for a long time. The phrase virgin wool, where did that come from? It was not referring to a sheep's modesty. It was basically referring to the yarn itself, the fibers that had never before been put into a consumer garment. Now, why would we need that? Because up until World War II even, you had shoddy mills. And there was a shoddy man. He would go through town ringing his bell, and people who had mended their sweaters one too many times, and people were really mending things, and they'd replaced their heels 6, 7 times, and they finally could not replace them anymore. They would sell their old knits to the shoddy man, and he would take them to the shoddy mill, and they would strip it down, shred it down, and usually they would take those fibers and they would use them to fill quilts and pillows and things like that. But you could also, in certain circumstances, take those fibers and shred them down and respin them into yarn. And so that's why they thought, well, how can we advertise a sweater that isn't made from shoddy? So, we'll call it virgin wool. There we go.
That's fascinating. So sort of like, post-consumer waste, a different way of putting it.
Yeah.
Wow, it's fascinating. Well, how does recycled fiber work now?
Recycled fiber now is a bit more sophisticated than that. You're not generally, in a couple cases, you are getting like recycled t-shirts and things like that when you drop off that bag of all those great cottons to Goodwill and they can't be worn quite anymore. Those can be taken in also strips of fiber from manufacturers or fabric if they have too many of them. But all too often, in a good way, they're blended. That's really how recycled fibers work best, because by blending you can compensate for any weakness that was added to the process. So here I have just a really nice, it's a cotton wool polyamide blend. It has 5% other fibers, and so don't panic when you look at a label and you see that it says 5% other. It's not like shredded milk carton or anything. It's U.S. labeling law. 5% or under any kind of fiber content, they believe that's not sufficient to merit being advertised on a label. That in a way it's like false advertising. The only exception being if that fiber provides a structural element to the yarn. So like strands of silver or elastic or anything like that, then it will be labeled. But otherwise, 5% other, don't freak out, totally okay.
Okay. And what does this actually knit up like? The stitch definition is great.
This is really wonderful. I mean, partly because it's the best of both worlds. You've got wool and cotton, and you have some polyamide in here for strength and elasticity. It knits up like just a really nice worsted weight wool. Great stitch definition because it's got a multiply structure. There's a little bit of slubbiness to it, and that's to be expected considering these are recycled fibers.
Right.
You get great stitch definition and elasticity. That would be the wool.
And there's almost a very subtle kind of heathery or almost tweedy in very subtle ways.
Yeah, it gives it's not a strong, steady, monochromatic color. What I like about that is that it gives fabric depth. It's like you're not looking at a yellow wall, you're looking at a wall that was painted with white and yellow, flecks of blue, flecks of green.
It's very rich.
Yeah, great three-dimensionality for cables, for ferro rib or for seed or moss stitch. It's a very pleasant kind of yarn to knit with, and a sort of a heathery, weathered, comfy feel to it, but the yarn itself is quite nice.
And it looks like a fairly simple spin, 5 plies, I guess, and not super tight. Is that pretty typical of, is that driven by being a recycled yarn or?
Yeah, I wouldn't do a recycled yarn in a singles just because plying fixes mistakes. And I don't even want to say mistakes, but like plying balances everything out. Yes. One strand could be a little bit thicker, one could be a little bit thinner, and plying just balances the whole thing out. The other thing about plying is that it strengthens the yarn, and when you're dealing with recycled fibers, they can sometimes be shorter. So you need a little bit more energy to hold the fibers together to deal with any wearability issues.
Right. And so this is, we're actually respinning fibers, but here are a couple other takes on recycled yarn. Here I see actual little strips of fabric, I think, from here to there.
Yep, that's what I was talking about. In this case, they took actual strips of fabric. It's leftover fabric from the manufacturing process, and then they shredded it into tiny bits, and then they fed it in while the yarn was being spun. You get this great kind of textural thing going on, these pops of color, a slight change in the consistency of the yarn from fuzzy to sort of shiny and smooth.
And of course, it's embellished as well. And then here, this is very deliberately tweedy.
Very deliberately tweedy, yes. Now this one was spun finer than this, and I want to say it's got even fewer plies, if I can take a peek at this for a minute. Yes, that one's got 3 plies. Not a huge difference, but 3 versus 5, it's going to be a finer, lighter kind of a yarn. Still great for 3-dimensional stitch work, and those heathered flecks, you could just do a ton with that.
Well, great. A lot of different ways to be a little greener with your knitting and make use of something that would otherwise go to waste. Thanks, Clara.